So this is our first session of Meet the Authors for our Volume 8 Desire. At Wimblu, we believe that stories have an ability to bring us together around a collective imagination, and that they can create a refuge where we can connect to other people and to the world. And so this is why we always try to create these spaces of community around the stories, to come together and maybe navigate better these uncertain times, and connect with other perspectives, and try to imagine together other possible worlds. And with this format of Meet the Authors, these encounters are part of our efforts to connect the persons behind our stories, and to create a sort of network or a community of storytellers that are addressing these intersections between ecology and spirituality. And these conversations then allow us to delve deeper into the themes that each story explores, and the creative processes involved, and sort of like the worldviews that the stories are emerging from. So today we have two guests. We have with us Karmit Even Zur. She's an artist from the United Kingdom, and her practice revolves around the dynamic interactions between humans and the non-human world. The work she does is grounded in modern earth energy work, shamanic practices rooted in European traditions, and her ongoing creative inquiry into eco-mythology. She is the author of our first story for the volume Nashwat, a text where she reflects on the human desire to connect with the unseen, and how pleasure may give us access to the land's own imagination and desires. And she does it by engaging sensorially and energetically with the landscapes at Cerro Patria. Our other guest is Hanna Laura Kaljio, an Estonian writer who's based in the UK as well. And through her work, she explores the interrelationship between creativity, movement, and belonging in an era of climate change. In the past, she has supported creative processes as a curator and lecturer as well. And she's the author of the story Longing of the Migrant Waters, a text that, witnessing the ways of water through those who live the landscapes of India, traces the wayfaring Abhisarika Nayika as a gateway into thinking desire, movement, and belonging as braided. Welcome, Karmit and Hanna. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us for this conversation. I want to just, dive into the questions right ahead. So let's start with water. In both stories, water or the liquid state of matter, they appear as characters that embody sort of this fluid and non-rigid movement of the journey that we take towards our personal and collective longings, right? And at the same time, there's also something about this invisible quality of this movement. And I think both stories kind of invite us to think that there are impulses underlying everything material, these movements, including our bodies, that direct us towards our desires. So I guess my first question would be, for you, what does this movement tell us about our personal desires, and about how we can align our desires with those of the landscape? And I'll just leave it open to see if any of you wants to jump in to that question first.
Hello, first of all, hello, and thank you for this invitation. It's very lovely to be here and together with all of you and with Hanna. I'll jump right into the question. I loved it that you started with water, because it's true that there is something about water and liquid states in both my text and in Hanna's text, that it almost is like a doorway, an invitation into the themes, into the thinking that guided us. And when you ask how can we align our, how can we listen better to the desires? There's something about recognizing the land and the earth and the landscapes as sentient beings, and about a type of listening that invites us to hear the desires, hear the movements, the very micro movements. They're very soft spoken, they're very silent, they're very visible to most eyes. But this, just recognizing the sentience and the agency of matter, of landscapes, of rocks and plants and water, indeed, allows us to listen into a desire that's in there, and and listen into what is speaking to us, what it wants to say to us in these times, well, in all times, really.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I think necessary at the same time, because it connects to also listening to ourselves and like these subtleties that also happen within our own bodies, and how they're connected to the land. Hanna, what would be your take?
Yes, thank you. Also from my side for the invitation. It's lovely to be here and to talk about water. Yes, also such a beautiful starting point, and I feel like water is such an amazing teacher. Like I find that I've been like kind of riding with water in different situations and always find some kind of teaching from it. And I think in this case, for me, like I really resonate with everything that Karmit was saying as well, but I'm just going to draw out something else that I think my text was kind of focusing on, that even as I was interested in water's movements, in ways that water isn't able to move due to dams and diversions, and kind of looking at water in the context of climate change, it was really kind of through the people that I met in India that water was speaking to me. And in a sense, I observed, and also, there's so much more context to add, but obviously I was a visitor in India, and very much kind of an observer of the people that I encountered and the lives they led, to the extent that I was able to and had access to. But kind of looking at how, what was going on in their lives at the time, and kind of moving across these two kind of very different landscapes, West India and South India, one area being kind of characterized by drought. And so, I saw people kind of looking for water, trying to find it, and in its underground movement. And then in the South, witnessing people kind of rebuild their home, and kind of this desire to recreate a home, to create community, being expressed kind of in the aftermath of waters kind of flooding and pushing them into motion. So I guess I saw, the people's desire to connect, to belong, to create, to be together, to live, and how water was sort of in its own wish or desire to move, kind of moving these people, moving through their lives. And so in that sense, like in relationship to the question of how we might align our desires with that of the non-human world, it's almost like I see those two very entangled already. They can't really be separated. And I think, of course, there is so much nuance that comes to it. But essentially, it's this kind of drawing forth into life that all of us express. And water is such a beautiful image for that. So I definitely agree with like what Karmit was saying. Like if we kind of attune and listen, then it's there. It's very obvious how we are sort of moved. And then, of course, it gets very, very concrete and detailed and more complex as we zoom in. Yeah, that's, I think, what I would begin with.
That is very lovely, and such a good point, that this connection between our human desires and the land's desires are already connected. It's not that we need to do anything to align them, but rather just to recognize these intersections, between our movements and the movements of the land. But you're both touching upon something so important, listening, and I think well, Hannah, you mentioned it a little bit in a way that you're listening, let's say, through the stories of the people and through how people, and like by this observation, this careful observation. But in your case, Karmit, I feel that you're also speaking about like a listening that is very in the body, you know, and like these energies, you work with energies as well. So maybe you can expand a little bit, both of you, on how do you listen to the land, at least in your own creative processes. Yeah.
Yeah, my practice is a practice that is very, I think it's very ancient and really and came to me very intuitively, although then I did study with different people who work with dowsing practices and ways of working with earth energies. But essentially the listening happens through the body, and it allows for it's almost like a psychosomatic type of communication, because the listening does happen through my body as a large sensorial organ, like a large ear, you know, my skin, my hearing, my it's even my I can say all my senses, and my sense of movement, and my sense of balance, and my sense of you know, all these other senses that we don't usually sort of take in to account when we think of our five senses. But it's becoming porous. It's becoming available for the imagination of the landscape to speak to me. So I can see it usually when I work with groups and we do this type of listening in, you know, slowing down, being very present with our breath, and allowing the senses to you know, to be open in the senses. But then it's more than just the sounds and the, you know, the sense impressions that come in. And then it's almost like these doorways of the doorways of perception open, and people perceive in many different ways. You know, sometimes it will be a body sensation, sometimes a knowing, sometimes a word, sometimes an image, sometimes all of the above. You know, it varies very much, but there's definitely a language, a kind of a soul language that can open up through practice with landscapes. And I think that we all know it. We all, you know, our animal body knows it and does it all the time, except that we perhaps don't have very much a language developed around it in some cultures. Some cultures obviously have this very developed, you know, so it's a matter of also listening to the type of language that we can hone around it.
Thank you, Karmit. Do you want to respond to that, Hannah, as well?
Yeah, that was very beautiful to listen to. Yes, I think it resonates with me in terms of the importance of the kind of sensorial presence or sensorial homecoming in a place. I think for me, especially now, again, grounding it in this text and in the process of writing, I find that, of course, it's sort of, you know, you have certain experiences. And for me, especially being in India, you know, I had these journals that I was keeping whilst I was there. And in the end, I had these, you know, kind of 9 weeks worth of notes. And as I was going back to them when I was starting to write this piece, I had this kind of, you know, embodied memory of what it felt like to be there. What did it sound like? What did it feel like to cross the Western Ghats as the sun was rising? Or the different, you know, how does a language sound that you can't quite comprehend? It's almost like music, or like birdsong. It's sort of like on the same level. Something else I was thinking about kind of at the background as I was listening to Karmit speak was that I think for me also, and I think this comes through in my writing, is that about 5 years ago, I started sort of dancing, like a dance practice, quite regularly. And I think it's been like the experience of experiencing movement in my own body kind of changes how I perceive movement outside of myself. And I think especially in a landscape outside, everything is movement. And so there's something about, sort of attuning to what is going on in one's own body and then being able to almost see that elsewhere, become receptive to it in a different way.
That is beautiful. Yeah. And I'm thinking about both what Karmit said and what you're talking about, Hanna. You know, Karmit spoke about the language, having the language, you know, to give form, you know, to these sort of embodied sensations and to these more like bodily experiences of a place, but then how, like, what's the language that we need for that, you know? And you're also speaking, you know, about this process of having the experience and then having the journals and then, you know, building a text out of it. And I'm thinking, you know, about these ways that we sort of shape these experiences. And this brings me to myth, you know, and you know, myth as its own sort of language, exactly to shape a little bit these stories of the land, you know, that I feel maybe myth is an attempt at this, you know, that how do we give shape to these experiences in a language that it's like open enough for it, you know, that it doesn't close it so much. And this is another aspect that is present in both your stories, you know, it's myth. And in particular, you're both bringing feminine figures of different mythologies, which I find it so interesting and resonating between both stories, right? So maybe you can share a little bit about this, your relationship to myth, like how do you understand and approach myth? And in particular to these stories, like why did you consider mythological female figures to speak about the more than human world longings? I'm gonna let Hanna take the lead this time.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to start with that. Yes, it's kind of a mystery, isn't it? Like, I think in terms of myth, again, it can mean so many different things. You know, we have cultural myths, we have personal myths, and I think there's something about that sort of creative writing that in itself, if it is embodied image-based, it can sort of hold much more than other types of discourse can hold. And so it's sort of like it sort of almost has this capacity to kind of approach very complex phenomena that we can't quite grasp directly. In terms of, so my text sort of has this figure called Abhisarika Nayika, who is one of the 9 Nayikas from these old Sanskrit treaties from India. And in a way, it was like I mentioned, I was keeping these journals. And so when I went back to them, I was obviously looking, first of all, how water was showing up in those notes. And there was only one sort of entry of her, because when I went to Mumbai to this museum, which is also mentioned in the text, I was quite drawn to this image of this woman just making her way through the night. And it was, I couldn't quite tell what was it that was drawing me to it. But I definitely made a kind of a mental note of it, like I should be paying attention to this as I'm writing this text or as I'm thinking about it. And I did a little bit of research into her, and I found out that her name translates as the one who moves or goes forward. And, you know, it made perfect sense. Of course, I'm trying to articulate something, you know, movement, such like kind of raw, elemental movement. And here is this mythological female figure, kind of almost like offering herself as an image for me to engage with, to kind of understand something about what is drawing my attention. And so it was really kind of not by choice that she kind of came into the story, but she helped me to kind of just, again, because I'm in this instance, I was engaging with, you know, a completely new culture. I have no prior experience. And so I was almost very grateful that that she sort of entered, because it was sort of with her help that I thought that I was beginning to maybe get a sense, or at least be able to ask questions about, so here is this figure, you know, she moves through the night, she has to move in secret. I wonder why. What was it that gave rise to her in the Indian psyche 2000 years ago, and how might she still be relevant today? then when I was thinking or reading the notes from when I was in South India, which is the bit with which the text begins, witnessing this older woman braid palm leaves into roofing, building homes, listening to stories of flood, I felt like Abhisarika Nayika was really this image of the forceful movement, the kind of desire to go, which just is able to get rid of all obstacles on its way, because there's no other way. This is who she is. This is her embodiment. And so again, she sounded like I would understand a river flood, that is the force. And anyway, so she had this ambivalence and all these different aspects to her that I felt I needed in order to be able to tell the story in some way, her kind of winding ways. Yeah, so it was kind of by accident, I guess, that she came.
Yeah, well, it doesn't feel like accident. Yeah, I think that I think that's the beauty of myth, right? That there's this openness to these stories, that it's not something that you tell and retell and retell and retell. It's actually something that you relate to, this story that in very different moments, in very different circumstances, you can actually relate to them, and they have something to say about the present and about the questions that you're exploring from very different angles, and they become this sort of guidance. How has it been for you, Karmit? I'm curious now after hearing Hannah's experience.
I loved it that you said that you were drawn to her, and you said it was not by choice. It's almost like she beckoned you. There's something about I mean, this is something I picked from what you just said, and it may not have been like that for you, but for me, it certainly was an invitation. I didn't choose to speak about her. She was the one who sort of, invited me and drew me in. And I tend to see myth or mythological beings as living forces. Living forces that are, it's almost like they're ecological, complex beings, like embodiments of different ecologies or different forces, and through these embodiments and through the stories that they occupy in different cultures and different psyches, they invite us into relationality with that which is abstract, or which is not human, and that we know how to converse with through our own language. So for me, myth is our way of relating to and conversing with much greater systems. And in the case of Aisha Kandisha, who is the one I am speaking about, this she's a character from legends that are very popular in Morocco, in present-day Morocco, but you can really trace her back to Amazigh traditions, and they speak about her in many parts of North Africa, and she's a being that's scary. She frightens people, and especially men, because she's very seductive and very beautiful. And most describe her having goat's feet, which is something that we can also see in different cultures. We can see that in some stories in Portugal, when we hear of like legendary beings, women, mermaid-like beings, who are always connected to water sources and have this feature of animal legs, and have the same kind of seductive element. And it's like it's a picture of something that is more than human,
Mm.
and that invites us into relationality, into some kind of dangerous relationality, we can say, because it's unpredictable, and we need to be careful as we enter this relationality. This is something of this what she's showing us with through her being. It's unpredictable. It's much bigger. It can inflict chaos like this because it's a territory that we don't necessarily know. So we need to step in with respect. But it's definitely, as I see it, an invitation into another kind of relationality. And I've just been to Morocco now and had by chance entered into a cave with women who are tending this cave, and they said this is the stone of Aisha. They said of Lala Aisha Bahriya, of Lala Aisha of the sea, and this is her main place. And then they went on to describe her, how they see her, that they see her in meditation, they see her in dreams, and how she speaks to them. And they have a lot of stories about relationality with her. And they also say, they can say, she's of the sea. She comes here to give us blessing. And then there was the kind of water coming down from the rock, and they give you blessing by her. So it's being able to relate to something that is not human in a through a personified kind of way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And the way that you both mentioned like this, like it's like an encounter, right? It's like a character on its own, it's not something that you are deciding to bring into the story. These figures are kind of showing up for the story, and they're allowing you to relate differently to that landscape, like you're saying, a different relationality. And Hannah, you were saying something about how it guided you into new questions, about the place. And so I'm thinking about this, about these figures as a sort of characters that open up the story, that suddenly there are so many possibilities to the story that it just allows you to get out of like really fixed ideas of what you thought about a place and opens up to new questions. And as Karmit mentioned, it helps you relate to the unknown, to step into the places that I don't know. And then, imagination comes in and creativity comes in, and then you sort of need to start relating different. And this, I'm going to start to move away to another topic, but at the same time, I feel it's connected, because you're speaking about listening to the land, and then you put this attention, you place this attention, you bring your senses, and the land starts to speak back in a way, and these characters show up, and then you start asking your questions with your stories, and I think that one of the things that really comes into question in both stories is this question of belonging, and Hannah, you speak about dance. You were just mentioning it a little bit ago, and you also speak in your text about this journey between the longing for home and the longing for the unknown, and this ambivalence, and the way that this figure also embodies it. And Karmit, your text is also very much about letting ourselves be seduced by the liminal, so there's a lot of things just about this crossing, about this being in this state of not being in one place or another, and this brings into question the idea of belonging. Both texts are just asking, what if we saw belonging not as connected to a fixed place, how if it's not fixed to a certain place or a certain identity, but what if we connect that to movement? And so I was just thinking that we could move to that topic a little bit, like why has it been relevant for you personally first to resignify belonging in this way? But also, how do you connect this to our context today? Eco-social crisis and, human displacement, non-human displacement as well, so yeah, maybe if you can speak to these, how you bring into question this concept of belonging and the relevance for you personally, but also in the context collectively.
Yeah, belonging. I mean, such a central human need. And I guess, yeah, it's a central piece of this essay, I think, in many different ways. And I guess in the text, I look at it from different points of view. I sort of bring in different disciplinary perspectives in addition to my own, and sort of try and trace it back to, our very early experiences of, the moments after we are born. How do we become who we are? And that it's a relational act, and that our first sense of belonging really originates in this interrelationship rather than a culture. We only come into culture later. And then looking at certain social anthropological views, which also kind of point to the fact that we as humans really belong to the journey or to the path rather than to a territory that is fixed before we set out. And I guess and I'll speak about the personal aspect as well, but I want to address something that you said, which is, not belonging to a specific place. I think it's both. And I think both are really important. And that's why, like, whenever I think about belonging, I'm sort of having to hold those things. It's both belonging to place, to being rooted, to loving, where you are and all of that. And it's being able to hold other ways at the same time, which are sometimes contradictory. And I think, and I'm really interested in that dynamic. And I think it is very much because of what is going on in the world, and probably increasingly will be, with climate-driven migration and all the different reasons why we are so globally mobile, have been and will continue to be, probably, with its obviously restrictions and so on. There are many layers to it. I think for myself, obviously, it comes from the experience of living between two countries and two cultures, and sort of inhabiting two languages, and moving between, and really trying to understand where I come from, which is a process that really only becomes possible, or became possible for me when I left where I came from, that perspective was needed. Then going back and rediscovering something about it, then coming back again. It's this sort of, it's been an interesting journey of kind of incorporating the different places that I perceive as my origin. And it really has nothing to do with, it has something to do with nation states, but it has much more to do with the types of territories and the climates that have shaped me, and the places that I've been to that have moved me, and it's all of that, and it's quite complex. I wouldn't be able to identify myself as belonging to one place only. And then, of course, like being in a dance practice, and being also around people who, live through dance, and seeing how they are bringing forth alternate conceptions of what it might mean to belong, which are to do with place, but also what does it mean to belong to oneself, to one's body, or to the process of movement or to dance. And yeah, putting it in a larger context, I think it's just that. I think it's a big question mark, in a way. And I think there are many people doing amazing work to try and sort of draw out these different changes that are happening. How are people responding, say people who are forced to move? And one of the sections in the text as well, has this piece of research which I found fascinating, about the relationship between migration and pilgrimage, and how spirituality kind of comes in as almost an like adaptive system to when we are severed from our original connection to where we come from. And yeah, so I think it's just a question we're collectively holding, like, what is this future going to look like when belonging is such a central thing for us as humans? And then how are we going to, cope with the changes that are underway for more and more people? And how will we negotiate that? So it's a big question.
Yeah, and I love what you say about not having this either or, like just jumping out of this binary, so that we can, again, like as we were speaking, with the help of these figures, these feminine figures that invite us into a wider space, to being more open to other possibilities, and to holding space for more, that more complexity, more things that might seem contradictory. Maybe they're not so much so, they're they're just different ways of belonging, you know, they're just different ways of experiencing belonging. So I think this is very important point for our times, you know, that we really need to move away from these either or, you know, just black or white views. We really need to start moving into these sort of liminal, very uncomfortable sometimes, but then and open and like without fixed answers. And maybe this is what it is about, you know, about being more comfortable with not knowing, you know, with not having a definite answer for these big questions like belonging is, you know. Karmit, would you like to jump in about belonging in your text?
Yeah. This conversation makes me think about so many people that I know around me, with a sense of belonging, actually, you know, belonging to a place, but not really touching the ground. So there's this sense of, yeah, we belong to this country, or we belong to this town, we're here, but the actual connection to the place is often, and this is probably from many generations of displacements, you know, sort of going back, and we are all in some one way or another have suffered displacement in some part of our history. And the way, or also the way that modernity kind of allows us to relate to the place where we live. So, you know, we may feel much more belonging with a group of people, or with a group with some certain ideas, you know, but with place, it takes a certain kind of consciousness and will to feel a belonging to place. And that's something I speak about in the text, is this, it's almost this kind of descent into matter, into the physicality of the land, that allows us, it's almost like a descent into the matter, into the spirit of the place. So it's a connection that allows us a new relationality and a different kind of belonging. And in the text, I also speak very much about the Strait of Gibraltar as a bioregion. I speak about it, you know, historically, when towards the end of the Moorish of Al-Andalus, what was Al-Andalus, the Moorish time in Spain and in Portugal and that whole area, towards the end, when the Almohads were ruling, the south of the Strait of Gibraltar, or the south of Spain and the north of Morocco, were one territory. So they were ruled under the same rulership. And that almost, when I think of that time, it makes me feel like there is something about this, the nation states that we now have, and the borders between a territory that is really one bioregion. That is something about, there's something strange about that when we think about belonging, because if we belonged really, if we felt a belonging to the region in its congruence, in the congruence of its ecology, I think we would make very different decisions about it. And I think we would have a whole different way of thinking about the people and the movement, the kind of movement that happens between these places, and just the way we look after it, the way we make decisions about it. So I was thinking about belonging in these different contexts.
Thank you, Karmit. And this also makes me want to underline the fact that one thing that I think it's brilliant in both your stories is that you're not shying away from the, you know, the political, the social questions that come up, you know, from these experiences, you know. I think this is one of the things that we at Wimblu really make an effort to do, you know, to say that we can speak about both things, you know, we can, it's not just that we can, it's that we need we need to speak about how our relationship to the land, our affective and spiritual relationship to the land has actual political and social implications, in the lives of people, that there is a real connection between how we show up in the relationships to the land and to each other, and how we organize sort of our world. And I was wondering, if I may push this question into it, as storytellers, how do you make these connections, or what do you think it's the relevance, of being able to speak about it all, let's not just focus on the problem or the actual context today, but let's just look at things with more complexity. Let's just look at things with more subtlety. Let's bring in emotions. Let's bring in myth. Let's bring in spirituality to speak about also the political and the social implications of how our experience with the land is happening right now.
I feel like different times and different moments, different contexts kind of call forth different ways of approaching or listening or speaking. And it seems like certainly when, say, I was writing this text relating to a specific context, India, me from where I come from, observing, like I said, the ways in which people's lives were affected by water. It's sort of very quickly, if one has a relational lens, can't sort of escape the ways in which everything really is entangled. These are just different, it seems to me, different facets of our experience in life here together. And again, it's not, I don't think that it's not the responsibility of every creative nonfiction text or every creative act to kind of address all of these facets. But then sometimes that's what's called for. And I think I certainly, with writing this text and thinking about this topic, was drawn to, think about, say, the sort of ways in which we, conserve water or rivers and the sort of, politics around that. And having certain opinions about that. But then at the same time, I also felt like I needed to keep it a little bit loose, to really not, it's not a political statement, but to kind of open up to the best of my ability and the context given, the facets that I'm able to sort of, make space for in this text. And yeah, I think there's something about being able to read things in relationship to each other. And maybe it was kind of key what you said too, that I think that they're all the factors that kind of play on our experience. It's really about the lived experience of now. And, each one of us inhabits a sort of different configuration of this now. So again, I feel like it's complicated. It's definitely not the responsibility, I don't think, but it's sort of, I felt the invitation anyway to a certain extent to engage with that.
I at a certain point when I was writing, and I always, because thinking of the Strait of Gibraltar as a bioregion is something that occupies a lot of my time and thinking. And so at a certain point when I was writing, I thought, it sounds so naive really to write, to bring in the affective spiritual aspects into a conclusion, into the politics, in the sense of, the nation states and the borders and the migration and all this, and it's sort of, can I even, dare to say it as a wish, as a shall we, as a proposition. But then I think that we have to, or I feel compelled to think about the politics of the otherwise, another kind of politics that does listen to the land's desires and dares to imagine ways that those desires have a voice and have something to say
Mm.
and invite us to these places where we might imagine another kind of politics. So, as I was very, very aware as I was writing it, this is kind of, okay, yeah, right, tomorrow we're going to erase this border and forget about Morocco and Spain as nation states and go back and sort of develop another thing. As together with that, I also think that this is the role of the artist. This is the role of the writer, of the creative. This is the role that we have, and this is the gift that we have in our hands, that we can speak a voice that beckons us to imagine something else, that speaks of this connection between, and the connection is a cultural connection. Historically, this is a connection that has been alive and present, and does invite us to belong to a place, to the actual substrata of the place, and weave a kind of politics.
Yeah, and I think you're both pointing to something that I love, that it's not just like the message, that you put out there in your text, but it's just also resignifying what participation means, like Hanna, you were mentioning something about that making a political statement, and we have this fixed idea that making a political statement or having this sort of participation it necessarily means that you have like a very strong opinion about something, and then you're trying to just like push for that opinion, and I think that in itself needs to be a little bit, rethought, can we change a little bit of what it means to participate? Because maybe it's not about putting forward opinions, but actually formulating better questions, or, more complex questions, more open questions, and how would political participation would look like if we were out there, thinking about the questions and not so much about what are the answers, what are the fixed answers. So, and I think this is what I love about both your texts. This is what they're doing, they're not telling you this is what you need to think, but what if, what if there was like, we were to think about this a little bit differently? What if we were to relate to this differently? And I think there's something very powerful there, an invitation to relate differently to all these contexts. I want to start a little bit to like going to this closing circle, and in both stories, all these ideas and emotions that ended up in the paper, as we've been speaking, were connected to this process of physical movement and travel across territories, and also energetic and spiritual journeys as well, And it kind of comes full circle, you first go into this place, you experience it, you take, you write your journals, you make a story, and you're trying to sort of like experience the place, but then the story in itself changes your experience of the place and how you might relate to that place in the future. And so I just wanted to sort of close this conversation with a question about your creative processes for these stories, and how did they affect your relationship with the landscape? Like we've been speaking a little bit about how your experience of the landscape influence your creative process. And I just want to turn it the other way around. How is it that your creative processes influence your relationship to the land, and about your own desires as well, because you're speaking about the desires of the land and the desires of the people there, and everything, but I'm wondering if it made something to your own desires and your own relationship to the lands where you're at, or the lands that you were speaking about. Yeah.
I felt like so this was the texts began after a series of journeys and moments in the Cerro de Patria, and I had been in touch with this place many years ago, and then kind of was invited back in the way that I describe in the text. And I had to go back as I was writing to keep tuning in again and saying, well, okay, and now what? Because I also describe it in the text. There was a kind of a progress of being allowed in more and more and more and more. So at first it was sort of no, and then every time gaining more, it felt like gaining more trust and being allowed in more. And I also had the sense that I had to bring what I was writing and sort of make sure that it was congruent with the experience and with what was then developing, because it was a trust building process. So of course, what I was going to write about it was part of this trust building process, if that makes any sense. And what can I say about my own desires? Yeah, not much about my own desire. That it was an ongoing conversation, and it kept informing what I was writing about. And then there kept being another layer, and what about the history? And then, and what about the culture here? And what about this? And so on and so forth. So it was definitely, it felt like as I was building this relationship with the place, and it was revealing more of its inner story, I was inviting others to this psychosomatic, imaginative possibility. And that for me is always a desire, this inviting others to feel this, to join in and feel their own relationality with places is a big part of my desire and what impulses me and my work. So I guess this was feeding into it. Yeah.
Thank you, Karmit.
I think for me, because this text very much engages with a place that I was new to, I think it's a very specific situation. I know in the past, for example, I've written texts, more kind of engaging with places that are actually part of my lineage, after which I've felt, that I've really either written myself into the story or they've written me into their story or something like that. I think in this instance, it was almost like holding that contrast or difference between, something that feels like home and something that is the unknown. I think there is this, I think one of the lines in the text as well talks about kind of our innate human desire for cultural learning and kind of coordination with others. I think because this essay, and it was a braided essay, right? Like one stream of it was very much kind of evoking the memory of this place and what I witnessed and experienced. And the other thread was very much kind of an attempt to think through the relationship between these kind of topics that are of importance to me and that I sort of observe and think about continuously. I think it would be interesting, when I do go back to India, like, has anything changed in that respect? I think at the moment I don't have that to kind of build on. So that would be interesting. I think the creative process, I think, it's still kind of ongoing. I think it really helped me to gain an image for something that I'm tackling. And I think these are sort of these topics, and I can continue to tackle them. So this definitely has changed. I've received some images to think with, and that's really great. And about my own desires, I think it's just this kind of curiosity always, and sort of the amazement of, like, coming into a culture that is so different to anything I've experienced before. And, and still going to visit family, living with local people, as well as, my own mother, and then going on and visiting other places. But this sort of just the amazement of being able to encounter something like that. Yeah, but I think the aftermath of the relationship to the place itself will have to be further explored. Yeah, in future.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful also the fact that, again, as I was mentioning before, how inviting these texts are, that of course you're speaking about specific places and specific stories, but to me it invites you to a relationship with wherever you are, and wherever your desires are at the moment, that just as you said a minute before, Hannah, this curiosity towards that, that how can we just pay attention, how can we just bring this attention and this curiosity to whatever it is that we have in front of us or that we're in contact with, and show up differently to that relationship. Yeah, definitely think both your texts are a beautiful invitation to do that. So thank you for your words and your work. I would like to give you, just open up the conversation a little bit. Maybe you have questions that you would like to ask each other. Or we also have Fernanda, who's here joining us in the conversation. Maybe she wants to ask something as well. So whatever it is, I just want to open up the space for anything you'd like to add, anything that you'd like to ask to each other.
Sorry, I wanted to do a quick comment. I think I found really powerful this first thing that we're talking about listening, and how our bodies are the way or the path that we have in our existence to kind of connect and listen to whatever the landscape that we inhabit is telling us. And I found it like really powerful, because it made me think that the process that we sometimes feel like we have to go somewhere, or we have to do something out of ours. I mean, I don't know, something else. I think it makes me feel and think that we have to start with our relationship with our body first in order to be able to listen, or to access to this. When I say listening, and what I understand about listening is like kind of get to that language, to understand the language of what is pointing, what Mother Earth is pointing us to. So I have that. I mean that feeling that we live in societies that makes like that relationship with our bodies really hard, and sometimes really superficial. And I think it's the starting point, like to make any real change in our relationship with the earth. If we don't have, not only in a physical way, in a healthy body, but in a spiritual way. When I say body, I mean both. I think that's one of the key things that I take out of this whole conversation. Thank you so much.
I can just jump on just to say something short, that I kind of continuing from what Pablo just said, and also thinking about your beautiful text, Hannah. I'm remembering you said something about reclaiming space for the water to, how did you say it? Just something like to reclaiming space for the water to interact with the land.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know if I could say this. And can you say more? It was like one of these. Wow, amongst all the different poetic things that you said, it's just something that also resonates for me with the body. It's like, so if the water can reclaim its pathways, and so how are we? What is that for us with our bodies? Yeah, maybe you want to say something more about that.
Sure. Thank you so much for picking that bit out. That's actually not my words. So these are Erica G's, the journalist who I referenced, and I was also equally captivated for the same reason that you just said. I think really kind of applying that to the human world, and what that means to reclaim space for water to interact with the land. I think the first part of the sentence is something like, the true nature of water is to flex with the rhythms of the earth, and thus to sort of she speaks specifically about drought and flood, and how to sort of what would be the way to mitigate. The way would be to let water to interact with the land. And kind of reading this in the human and in the social world, it suddenly becomes very complex again. And the sort of privilege to move seems to apply to both water and people. So thank you for surfacing that. I just had to put that in because I think it was really resonating with what I was kind of thinking about.
Yeah, and if I may add to that one of the things, well, before we started this conversation, Paulo was mentioning how both of your texts sort of like embodied a lot of what we were looking to explore in this volume of Desire. And because our previous volume had been on movement, it was so natural to move from movement to desire, because when we were doing the volume about movement, then we were just asking like, wow, there's so much moving, everything is moving, everything is in these cycles, in these rhythms. And then this question arises that, where is this movement coming from? What's the force kind of putting all this movement forward? And then eventually we came to this idea that, okay, let's do a volume about desire, because all this movement, what's its origin, and we're speaking about, well, it just feels like everything wants to move, like there's this innate desire to move. And I think that's what your story sort of like touch upon, this like intricate relationship between movement and just, being alive and being in this world, that there's not one without the other, and desire and belonging and these connections, it all comes as this sort of like force that keeps moving, everything. Yeah. So it was a beautiful way to thread it all.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a little bit just as a reflection of Karmit's text too, because I think that she really was able to capture just that, this desire. Because when I was reading, for example, how you were called and to follow the image of the serpent into the cave, and I think this is it. It's almost like it's this land dreaming capacity, which is the desire. And yeah, I just thought that you captured it really beautifully. So it was a real pleasure to read.
If you want to support our project, you can share this episode, visit our digital magazine wimblu.com, subscribe to our newsletter, or join our Patreon community where you can access exclusive content starting at $3 a month. Your support allows us to create and share content that reimagines a fair and healthy world for all life forms.